Alright, so the homework was several things. One was adding a score display to the game, that is adding points for every kill that you get. And then the second was increasing difficulty every time you beat the level. So every time you beat a level, there would be more asteroids to spawn. And also from last week, or 2 weeks ago, it was to add sound effects and music to the game as a result of the lab. So in essence, it should look like this, and I want to go over the code for this, for how this works. You can see there's a score display, and last week we already did the flashing invulnerability part. But there's a bunch more asteroids, and it just keeps ramping up. And then when you game over. Okay, so let's go over the score first. And I think, to me, probably the trickiest part about getting some of this stuff right is where to put your code. I think at this point, it shouldn't really be an issue of how to write code that draws text to the screen. It's more like how to combine that with all the rest of the logic that's running. And so the way I like to think about it is I like to think about what class does this behavior belong in? What idea am I trying to implement? In the case of score, it's kind of an idea that spans across the entire game. It spans across lives, and it spans across shooting and asteroids. It basically is kind of above that, which is why when I put in the score, I put it into the this game class here. And this game class is the generic. It's kind of like a class that contains everything. If you can think of asteroids and all the things that run in asteroids, this thing maintains a list of objects that live inside of it. And so this is kind of also where I put the variable for score and eventually also my current level. Since I put my score here in this class, I created a function to let me add points, which just is going to take the score here and add the amount that you pass in. So it's just going to do a plus equal amount. And inside this draw function inside the game, it's already going through all the objects and drawing them, but now I grab the score and I call the standard toString function on the score, which returns a string, and I create this score colon with this actual score value as a string, and I assign it to this text variable that I create here. And every frame, I'm setting the character size, I'm setting the position, and I'm drawing it here. And this is just happening in the draw call for the game. And this is actually also where I put the game over text. So if you were able to do the game over stuff from 2 weeks ago, just right above it you can see I also do the score text here. And the only difference between the two really is this one only draws if you've lost everything. And so the idea though now is that inside the game objects, every time something blows up, like an asteroid, in addition to spawning smaller asteroids, all I have to do is tell the owner of this asteroid, which happens to be the game, hey, add 100 points here. And then in the medium asteroid, I add 50 points here. And the small asteroid, I add 10 points here. And so that's all you really need to do. Once you call this function to add points, it adds it to the current score, and then every frame, I take the current score here, convert it to a string, and then I append it to the other string that I have here, and draw it on the screen. And that makes me draw it on the top left. All right, and that's pretty much all you need to do to get the score working. Is you need to hook it up inside the game objects here when they get destroyed, and then draw it in the game here. Okay. Any questions on that? The next part is multiple levels and increasing difficulty. So this required a little bit more work because there wasn't really much in the way of levels and spawning asteroids aside from the base level of spawning asteroids. So the general idea though is that there's a couple of things that I want to make it easy to do. One is spawning asteroids. Right now I have 5 asteroids that spawn in at the game, but every level I want to spawn more asteroids, and I want to kind of reuse the same code that I've been using to spawn them. So let me show you what I did here. So again, inside the game, I added a function called spawn asteroids, which the way this function works is when you call it, it'll spawn 5 asteroids plus 1 for every level that you're on. And that's just how many asteroids it'll do. So if I go into this function here, it has a for loop, and if you look at the for loop here, it loops for whatever level you're currently on plus 5, right? And for me, I go to my constructor and I start off at level 0, which is actually level 1 because even though I start off at this is 0, I have 5 asteroids at level 1. So here, when I spawn the asteroids, I just spawn however many levels I have plus 5. And this logic here is the same logic that used to be inside my engine CPP. I used to do this logic right here inside the main function. So I move that logic into the game CPP here. And then all I have to do is figure out a good time to call it. So there's basically 2 places that you need to call this thing. The first place you call it is here in the constructor for the game. So when the game first is created, right at the very bottom here, I call spawn asteroids at the bottom of the constructor, which then basically spawns me 5 asteroids right away. The second part is that, which takes care of the initial spot for when you spawn in. The other part we need to do is how do we make this thing work for when you destroy all the asteroids? So let me talk about this next. So here's the logic. So this is what normally happens if you spawn asteroids and you haven't had, if you haven't written the code to start the next level. Oops, I didn't actually, I deleted too much. Goodness. Although my asteroids are blowing up, they weren't actually getting destroyed. I know. I'm gonna make it home. Right, so this is what happens, right? All the asteroids are gone, and this is when I would want to start a new level. And so this is the logic that I asked you guys to write. And the key part to this behavior is that you need to detect if all the asteroids are actually blown up. And so the best way to do that is, I kind of gave you guys a hint for the homework, which is to write a loop that iterates over every game object and test each object to see if it's an asteroid, and if it is an asteroid, then you aren't done yet. So I have this concept of a variable here called all asteroids are dead. It's right inside this loop. This is inside the update function here. And I'm going to go through this loop, and every time I go through the loop for right here, this is already checking to see if the object is destroyed. And if the object is destroyed, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to delete it from the array, and I'm going to delete the pointer, the data that exists at the pointer, and then I'm going to continue on to the loop. If the object is not destroyed yet, then what I do is I fall through and I go into this else condition. Now if you look here at this else condition, look what it's doing. It's taking the current object, it's doing a dynamic cast into an asteroid pointer. and it's comparing it to see that it's not equal to null. This condition here is the key to figuring out whether this thing is an asteroid or not. So if I get to here, and I currently am looking at an asteroid, and it's not destroyed yet, which means it's flying around, then I'm going to go down to here, and if this is true, that means that I'm currently looking at a live asteroid that hasn't been blown up yet, which means I can set this thing to false. Now, what I have to do is, now that this thing is set to false, remember, I'm assuming that all asteroids are dead by default, and I'm going to prove myself wrong as soon as I find one. If I found that all asteroids are dead, all I have to do is increase the level and spawn new asteroids. And then this will cause me to create more asteroids that are there in the world. So let me just show you what happens when I actually put a breakpoint here. So it's going to hit right away. So currently, this object here is a large asteroid. That's what this thing is. It's casting this thing into an asteroid, and it returns true. It returns an asteroid that's actually a valid pointer, which means that I'm allowed to set this value. It currently is true, right? So I'm going to set to false instead, which means all asteroids are dead or false, which means when I get to this if statement now, this thing will be false, which means I'm not currently going to spawn a new level yet, right? If I didn't have this condition in here, what's going to happen is every time through this loop now, it's going to basically spawn 5 asteroids, then 6 asteroids, and 7 asteroids. It's going to spawn asteroids every frame until the game basically slows down to nothing. Let's see here. Is that hard enough? So this right here is the key. I'm assuming that all the asteroids are dead by default, and then this is basically disproving that assumption. Yeah.
So if you wanted to, like, so you know, like how you're transitioning to the next level, you kept dying like immediately.
Mm-hmm.
If we wanted to add that invulnerable thing, would we just add that invulnerable code into the if all asteroids are dead?
You know what you could do? The better way to do it, you could probably do that in here. But what I would do is when you get to spawn new asteroids here, I would actually make the player invulnerable here. So I would actually add a function here. So we actually already have a function. We have some behavior inside the player. If you guys remember, the invulnerable time left here, if that's greater than 0, we do this invulnerable thing. So what I can do is I can make a function that says make invulnerable, right? I'll just make this function here. And we'll go down to here, and I'll just say m invulnerable time left is equal to 3 seconds. That's all this thing needs to do. And I'll go to my constructor, and the first thing I'm going to do is call that function. So I'm going to make myself invulnerable. But now, also in the game, when I spawn new asteroids, I'm going to get the player, and I'll make him invulnerable too. And how do I get the player here? So I'm going to write a loop. I'd have to do dynamic cast as well, again. So here, I'm going to do dynamic cast for player. I'm going to create a pointer to the player. And all I have to do is here, make invulnerable, like so. So when I blow up all the asteroids, it makes him invulnerable. So let me do this as a test here. I'm going to spawn 1 asteroid. So all I'm doing is, after I increase the level, I just go through it. I try to find the player. As soon as I find any player, no matter who he is, I'll make him invulnerable. So I'm only just going to spawn 1 asteroid now. So see how I'm invulnerable again? So I won't be killed right away. Which is a nice, easy way to make it so that you don't get cheesed out of that behavior. Okay? Alright. Let me talk a little bit about how I did the audio for the game too. So there's a lot of different ways you can set up the audio for your game. I'm going to show you guys the way that I do it, how I do it for my own projects. and how I do it for all, like, anything I want to set up that's a nice, easy way to have playable audio from wherever you are. So if you guys remember the concept of an enum back in the day, an enum is a way to assign a name to a value, and when you declare an enum like this, you give the enum a name. So in this case, I want to create an enum called the sound type. And these right here represent all the different types of sounds that I can play in my game: an explosion, shooting, death, and spawning sound. And each of these values start at 0. This starts at 0 here by default. And so this explosion is actually the number 0, goes to 1, 2, 3. And this number right here is 4. And what I can do is I can take this value, and I'm going to make a system that lets me create sounds that play using this enumeration. So look here what I did. So all sounds need two parts. It needs a sound buffer, which is the file that represents the sound, and then a sound itself, which is the currently playing sound in your game. So what I did here is I made a static array. This is an array with count number of elements in it. So how many are this? Can you see from here this would be equal to 0, right? This would be equal to 1, and so on and so forth. And this right here is equal to 4, right? So because count is equal to 4, when I put that value here, it's actually me making an array of 4. But I'm using an enum here because the reason I like using enums is I always consider that the number of sounds I want to play might be more than just 4. Maybe I want to make a sound for invulnerable running out, right? I can add this sound, and I don't have to touch this array. So I have these two arrays here of sounds and sound instances, and what I do now is inside the game, look here for my array. So in my array, explosion, shoot, death, and spawn each are calling load from file. Remember, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. But it's not just numbers. I actually have names associated with these things. So if I go here, and I'm loading each of these sounds, look at the file names here. I'm loading the explosion wave for the explosion sound. And also I'm going through a loop here, and this is what's nice about having two arrays here, is that for my instances of sounds, I'm calling set buffer on them right after I load them from the file. So I'm doing this all up front. I'm doing all this stuff once. And the reason why this is really nice to use in an enumeration is how do I play the sound is I have a nice function here, right here, called play sound, and it takes the enumeration that I created called play sound with an enum. And this thing is one line of code. Play sound is one line of code to say, hey, go through my sound instances for the type that you pass in at that index here. This might be 2, right, or 3. It doesn't matter. It's whatever enum they pass in and call play on it. And so if you actually look at this function and see how simple it is, you go to the game, and so when I go to something like the asteroid, look here how I play a sound. Look what I pass in for playing a sound here. I pass in that enumeration here. I pass in explosion, right? I want to play an explosion. It's very clear when reading this. If I didn't use an enum to do this, I would be passing like 0 here. And in the case of me shooting, this would be what? Shoot, it would be 1. So I'd be passing in 1 here. And this makes it a lot harder to read. Like I don't actually know what sound this is. But looking at this code right here, by using enumeration, it makes it very easy to understand that I'm passing in a value of explosion into here. And all this is, it just converts it to a number. Essentially, it converts it to 0, and then calls it into this function here, which then indexes into this array of sound instances and calls play on it, which I've already set up earlier in the constructor here. I call set buffer here. And that's how I set up all my sounds, is I have an array. And so as I showed you, I added an invulnerable running out sound. The only thing I need to do to get the sound, get a new sound added, I only have to write one line of code here, is change this to be invulnerable running out and pick a wave file that I want to use. And then if I want to play a sound in my game, all I have to do is pick a place in my code that I want to run, that I want to put this, and maybe I want to put it here. Like so. I just call him owner play sound. Something like that. Actually, what I can do is if I only want to play it once, okay. So now if I have less than half a second left of invulnerable time, it'll play the spawning sound again, and all I have to do is I added that enum. You guys could hear it actually played it twice. Once for spawning, and once for when the time is running out. And so I can do that and play other things too. Like I can play the other sounds here. I can play explosion sounds here as well, if I wanted to. And all this stuff is this is what's called an API for playing sounds. It makes it so that I don't really have to think too much about picking up sounds. And I can reuse the same sounds over and over again. I can play all these sounds all at the same time if I wanted to. And if I want to play it in more than one place, it's very easy for me to do one line of code. All right? And obviously it's okay if you didn't do it this way, but this is kind of the method that you want to strive for, is having a simple, easy way to have all these things hooked up, and you can extend them here. And you can easily see now if I want to add even more sounds, it would be a couple lines of code, and then I can hook that into wherever I want. Okay. Any questions on this? Music is kind of a similar way. I have this variable here for music that I also load in the constructor. Nothing really too crazy fancy here. Literally in the constructor, I open it from the file. I set it to be looping and then call play on it. That's all you need for music. And some of you guys might have had problems with this issue where it says could not open, failed to open sound device or audio device. You do have to run this one file you can download from the internet. It's called OpenAL that you want to get. And actually put a copy of it in Zool. So this file here is basically like a set of requirements that you have to install, and it's weird that these machines don't have it, but it's up on Zool anyway, so you can grab it. Yeah, so you'll have to run that if you get that problem. All right. Everyone hand in what they had. Let me grab this. I want to go over the final project with you guys. And I'll give you guys the rest of class to work on it. Later in the week. Okay. So if you guys remember the Pong final, the idea was to take the game of Pong and add a twist to it. So I'm going to take this concept and add it to asteroids. And so the general idea is that I want you to take what we have done so far with asteroids, and I'll put the copy of what I did for the solution here up on Zool so everyone can get a chance at it. And you can start from here if you'd like. of all these for now, and then this here. So I want you guys to add a twist to asteroids. And you have to pass the idea to me first, because I want to make sure that the idea that you have is, one, substantial enough to warrant like being like the final project, and two, that it's also not too big that you can't do it within the week that we have left. And I want you guys to extend the existing game of asteroids, but you can kind of choose however you want to. And I'm giving some examples here. It'd be great if you didn't like just jump and use the same ones, but you can definitely do these. These are good examples of good ideas that I think you can do if you want to pick these. For instance, here, adding an AI-controlled UFO that shoots at the player. So something that spawns in and moves across the screen and shoots the player. Another one is adding a menu system that lets you control the difficulty of the game, which is outside the game itself. Add a second player, like a co-op asteroids game that can play at the same time. Maybe they use WASD to move, and they use like control to shoot. Adding a high score system that saves your high score. So think about how the high score that you get, and if you close the game and reopen it, I'd want to see that high score again. That's another good example. Or adding power-ups to the game that change the game in interesting ways. You'd have to add several power-ups, but things like a multi-shot or like super speed or invincibility would be good ideas for power-ups. Things that are not substantial enough to warrant the final project is like changing the size of the asteroids of the player, or changing the speed of the player, or the amount of bullets you fire, or how fast you shoot. That's not enough by default. So it has to be something more, like it has to be like an actual, like kind of a larger feature. And the idea is that you're going to hand in a fully functioning version of asteroids with your twist on it. And this means that it has to work as intended, no bugs, a controllable player, and the asteroids have to be all destructible as well. Okay? Any questions on this? So once you have your idea, or you want to like pick an existing idea, let me know what it is, and then you can vet that idea with me, and then I'll approve it, and then I'll help you scope it to be within the time that we have remaining. Okay. All right, so I put this up on Zool, and this will be due next week. If you finish this project and hand it in to me before the end of next week, you don't have to come to class, but I'm coming to class next week regardless. You can work in class if you need to next week as well. If you need time in class to do it here, you can. You can hand it in at the end of next week class too. Okay? Cool.